On this episode of the I2I Forum podcast, Dr. David Wilkinson, founder and editor of the Oxford Review. He'll be talking to us about how his experience as a police officer led to starting the Oxford Review, the impact of AI on critical thinking within the leadership and the wider organization. All this and more as we go eye to eye. Hi, David. Really glad that you could join me to have this chat. And now, I've known you for quite a while, but I just want you to introduce yourself to the people who may not know you.
I'm David Wilkinson. I'm currently the editor-in-chief of the Oxford Review. Basically, what we do is we take kind of academic research and I kind of liken it to turning it into human for practitioners. I suppose that's my day job. I've just retired from academia, so that's my whole job now.
Well, actually, when I met you, you told me about your background and how you got into this, because you started off in the police force, of all things.
I started off in the army.
In the army?
Oh
my gosh, see?
Yeah. Even further back.
Yeah. My goodness. And so what was that journey? What took you to where you are now?
So I left school, no qualifications. I'm dyslexic. I got 1 O-level in physics, bizarrely, but flunked my maths. You figure that one.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was it was mid-70s. There were no jobs. I did one day in a chicken packing factory with all these, in mind I was 17, with all these middle-aged women who were taking the rip out of me mercilessly. I lasted one day. And I left there and walked past the army recruiting office and they said, yeah, basically we're interested. And as the rest they say is history, I became a military policeman first. So I was in the military police, which was an interesting grounding for a 17-year-old who was kind of frightened of his own shadow, which was good for my kind of confidence and fitness and things like that. Most of that time, Northern Ireland, 70s, mid-70s, late 70s, so 2 years in Northern Ireland. And then I left and joined the civil police and then did 18 years as a police officer, ended up as the head of, director of national police training, basically, for training trainers, police trainers, just at a time when the police were trying to change the culture. There was a lot of flack that the police had got after the riots in 1981, which I was also involved in.
As a police officer?
As a police officer,
yeah. Rather than in the right.
I was on the wrong side of the shield. People were throwing things at me rather than me throwing things. And then so there was a whole kind of whole-scale thing around changing the culture of the police. It was seen as institutionally racist, which I think was a right call, and a whole series of other things, sexist. It was largely a preserve of white men, largely people like me, actually, ex-services, and didn't really understand how to police different communities. And that's why the riots kind of started in 1981, involved in the miners' strike, and a whole series of other things that I was involved in over the years. And as I say, then moved into training, became a director of studies, as I say, for national police training.
So you'd mentioned that they actually invested in you, in the fact of letting you be parts of training programs and sending you different places.
Yeah, so what happened was they were quite cute, actually, because they realised there was this realisation. They got a whole load of professors in and various other people and said, like, how are we going to change the culture? And they said, well, you're not going to do it by bringing outsiders in. The culture's too strong. So you're going to have to get a few weirdos that are in the culture that seem to be doing quite well, but nobody quite understands why, and get them together, people who've got a bit of they've got a brain, and then we'll train those people up and we'll bring them in. So I was lucky enough. They did this huge trawl. 25,000 police officers went into this trawl, and out of it, there was a whole series of layers. And they just put us through all sorts of a battery of tests. They actually took us off to some woods and did a whole series of things that we had to do. And eventually, out of all of that, 18 people fell out. I was lucky enough to be one of those 18 people. We were then taken away with these professors basically, and a whole group of other consultants and various other people. I'd never even thought about being in training. I was on the streets just before that. It was teaching us how to facilitate. It was a facilitated program. And they were asking a whole load of questions. And you do things like, you come in one day and they'd say, right, okay, what do you need to learn? People had answered, and they came round to me and I said, well, you've got to be intelligent, haven't you? Which wasn't a very intelligent response. And they said, of course, they then said, what do you mean by that? And I went, I don't know, really. I've got no idea. They said, right, okay, here's a ticket. Go and see this professor. Well, firstly down in Oxford, came back. And then I said, oh, there's this thing called multiple intelligence theory. And they said, yeah, Howard Gardner, here's a plane ticket. Go and see him at Stanford. And we were just flying around all over the place, collecting stuff from the originators of these theories and things, bringing them back, learning. And really, the kind of 18 of us we kind of moved into this kind of period of, I felt like I had two brains. It was incredibly, it really accelerated learning. And there was 6 months of this. It was an incredible time and an incredible journey. And I can't imagine them ever spending that amount of money again. But in terms of it being formative, it changed my life, completely changed my life.
So there's a couple of things that came out of that. Number one, which are really relevant now for me, what I see going on in the change and transformation industry, was the first one where you said intelligent, and they go, what do you mean? And I think that's something that's missing in conversations in business today at the very fundamental level. I mean, I personally feel that there's billions of pounds or dollars being lost in miscommunication because people don't seem to stop and say, what do you mean? And make sure that they align that understanding. I think that's a really powerful thing that came out that you recognized back then.
Yeah, and actually, strangely enough, you should mention that. Later, I was doing consultancy work when I was a lecturer, so kind of have to earn proper money. And I was in a very large national institution in the UK with the board, and they were all talking about the strategy that they were developing. And as I was listening to them, I was sat in the same room as them, and I was listening to them. I thought, hang on a minute, they're talking about very different things. And I said, can I just stop you for a second? What do you mean by strategy? And the chairman said, that's a good question. And came out with an answer, and I could see everybody else like looking at him going, that's not my understanding of a strategy. Yeah. And they all had different definitions of a strategy. And you kind of think, whoa, hang on a minute. We haven't even had this discussion about what are they actually talking about. Yeah. They've just made this assumption they know what they're talking about. Nobody dare ask and say, excuse me, what are you talking about? Because it doesn't sound the same as what I'm talking about. They just got focused on the doing. And we had this great conversation. And as a result of that conversation, they came together and they had a coherent strategy as a result of it, rather than everybody going away thinking that they were doing something, but doing something else.
I'm actually hoping that you will be able to weigh in from time to time. I'm starting a series of posts just on LinkedIn, because I think that's a place to do it, called Elephants in Emperor's Clothes. Because I feel there's an elephant in the room amongst the change community, yeah? And I feel it is a case of the Emperor's Clothes. Nobody wants to get called out. I have all the answers. I have all the frameworks and it sounds right. It makes sense. It's not, however, being applied. It's not, however, tied to the science, which is the reason why I'm a part of the Oxford Review, which I want to touch on in a moment, where we have people who, what I call is an art rooted in science. It's these artists who can, from their life and professional experience, are able to go into situations, identify which tools make the most sense, and actually help people apply. In fact, going back to another point that you raised earlier on, you guys recognize, or they recognize in the police force, you can't bring an outsider to do this. What you have to do is identify the right people within the organization, take them through that intensive process where they have the two brains, and allow them to lead so they have the credibility with that target group. So I'm just hoping that, you'll kind of weigh in from time to time on, elephants in emperor's clothes, because one of the things I'm doing is I'm just throwing out jargon out there and saying, okay, can we agree what this means? because we're miseducating our target markets and audiences. They're getting confused, and as a result, the day rates reflect the fact that they don't believe it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a number of issues here. Partly is this thing about people not really coming down to an understanding of what these things mean, what they are, and that level of discussion. One of the big things that I've learned over the years, and one of the things that process really kind of kicked off for me, was this idea, and this is becoming really pertinent, particularly at the moment with AI, is our ability to be able to critically think. And it's one of the session, in fact, it's going to be our next session within the seminars within the Oxford Review, is around, what is critical thinking? How do you do it? How do you develop it? And one of the things that's being discovered through the research with people in organizations is that it's doing a couple of things. One is it's making us dumber. In as much as, in fact, there was a paper released yesterday, or at my desktop somewhere, looking at what the use of AI is doing in terms of critical thinking, and it's reducing the amount of critical thinking. It's reducing the level of cognitive effort that people are willing to make. So they reach for AI rather than thinking through things, and they're accepting it. Even though they know that it's likely not to be right, they're much more likely to accept something from an AI than they are another human being. When you actually look at, I know, there's a whole load of really interesting kind of stats in this. But one of the key, I suppose, characteristics of people who are using AI in organizations is this ability to critically think. And then you go, okay, but what is that? So this is one of the things that I'm still lecturing at the university here. And it's one of the things that I'm still teaching is exactly this, is critical thinking to the lecturers at Oxford, and how do you develop that in our students? But first, just like your meaning thing, we've got to understand what critical thinking means, and how do you do it? And this is kind of core and germane to what we're doing at the Oxford Review, because critical thinking is really about evidence-based thinking, but also understanding the evidence-based. How valid and reliable is it? What's the argument that's sat there? What are the consequences of all of this, and a range of other things? So this issue about critical thinking strips through just about everything in organizations, and the use of good evidence in our arguments, and understanding that they're arguments. And there's a whole lot more as well. We're on for days about this.
That said, and which, by the way, so I will jump onto right now the Oxford Review and kind of like how that started, because I remember it was when I was one of the club managers and lead mentors in the Business Wealth Club, how I got to meet you in the first place. But I love the tagline. It's to be the tagline. I want you to say it.
Powered by research.
Powered by research. Yes. And then the other one about the person in the room.
Oh, yes. Being the most knowledgeable person in the room.
The most knowledgeable person in the room, which is a double-edged sword, which I have to admit is one of the things I love about the Oxford Review. But in some cases, I'm like, well, actually, evidence shows, and they're like, oh God, here he goes. But this is the whole thing about the art part again, knowing that I have the knowledge that is backed up for those people who need that evidence-based kind of thing to back me up, that have confidence in me, and which is backed up and reinforced by the fact that I can point to evidence. I can point to my peers within the Oxford Review, because those serendipity calls are, wow. I mean, we've had people bring information there. I'm having this situation. What are some of your thoughts? And it becomes like a mastermind, that we're able to share from not only the empirical academic stuff, but people's life experiences and everything to inform how they deliver their work. And some fantastic things are happening. Anyway, let me roll back to tell me more about how the Oxford Review started.
By complete accident.
So there's no romantic story here, like a vision, a light in the sky.
Yeah, I'd like to tell you all about my vision that I didn't have. No, it was a complete accident. In fact, when you first met me, when we were in this thing called the Business Wealth Club, which was a business thing, I was actually running courses around emotion regulation and helping people deal with things. Because my main area of, I suppose, academic expertise is around uncertainty. And one of the big things that came out of the research that I was involved in and others is that one of the base things that we need to be able to deal with uncertainty is emotion regulation. So that's it. Now, there was a textbook that I was meant to be writing that kept on not happening, and the publishers had paid me in advance, and eventually they said, look, you either got to send us the money back or you've got to write the flipping book. And I kind of looked and I thought, right, if this isn't going to get done unless I just down tools and write the flipping thing. So I took a sabbatical from the university to write the textbook, but I also had private clients, so coaching. I was doing coaching and consultancy work. And I thought, right, I know how this works. If I disappear for 6 months from these organizations, it's going to be as if I never existed in the first place. Organizations have got very short memories. So all I did was I did a quick email out to everybody. There was only 200, 300 people on this list. I just pulled all the names together in my diary and just sent out an email saying, look, I'm away for the next 6 months, but I've not disappeared. And then what I decided to do, because it was a textbook, as I was kind of digging up new pieces of research and things, every 2 weeks I'd send out a little email saying, I found this piece of research, you might be interested in it. And every now and again, I didn't get a lot of traction. Just every now and again, people go, thanks for that, Dave. That's really useful, or really interesting. Thanks. And that was it. 6 months. Anyway, 10 years ago, almost to the day, actually, today, the Oxford Review started. And it restarted because on Christmas Eve, like 10 years ago, I kind of looked in the bank account and thought, I need to get back to some sensible work here. And I sent out an email on Christmas Eve to all those 300 people saying, look, I'm back in the new year. If you've got any interesting projects, you know what I do, the uncertainty stuff. I'm your chap. Just let me know and I'll stop sending and I'll stop sending these daft emails, basically. And that was it. I went into town, did the usual man shopping, Christmas Eve, grabbing things off the shelves. And then I went to Brown's in Oxford to meet some friends at about 4:00. All the shops were shut and all the rest of it. And I got there a bit early, grabbed a mulled wine, sat down, and I thought, well, I'll just go through my emails. And there was like 300 unread emails. And I thought, what? And then I thought, I know what this is. I thought it'll be out of office. I'll just delete them while I'm waiting for my friends, right? It wasn't. It was all these people saying, don't stop the emails. We love them. And I was like, what? So Christmas Day, my head's whirring, and I'm like, this is how sad I am. Boxing Day, the day after Christmas Day, I then sent out another email saying, yeah, okay, but I've got to eat. If you're prepared to pay if I'm going to do this. And on January the 2nd, 10 years ago, 2015, the Oxford Review was born. 200 subscribers, no website, just an email list. And then I didn't have a website until about March. And then it just grew from there. And we've got all sorts of, like, the UN users, the NHS, all sorts of, like, large organizations, small organizations.
I mean, I speak to people in New Zealand, Australia, Philippines, United States. I mean, I have a global reach through the network that you're providing through the Oxford Review, which also allows me to understand some of the cultural biases in the way I'm approaching things, because I'm running global projects. So I'm saying, somebody who was out in Australia, I'm saying, well, I'm going to approach it that way. And they go, oh, well, mate, it was our guy, Chris, because Chris is quite on right? And he was like, And fantastic advice to help me shape the way that I'm working with these people. So for me, it's been a valuable, I would say invaluable, but it's actually valuable, and I think I'm getting a lot of value for the money, resource to allow me to expand my practice, my reach, and my community, the people that I can actually trust for advice, because they're delivering this day on day and they're not trying to sell me anything. That's the main thing. Is I'm on LinkedIn, I do an article, and then all these people start sending me, watch this video, blah, blah, blah. We can help you build I'm like, and I kind of forget sometimes that LinkedIn is now social media more than it is a business networking and growth learning community. And it's got to be, because people got to eat. I totally get that. But I really enjoy hearing that story about the Oxford Review, because knowing how it's impacted, my work over the past decade, I'm just appreciative of that, and which is the reason why, I want to have this conversation with you. Additionally, one of the things I wanted to touch on was, because you were talking around AI and how people just not just losing their critical thinking. One of the things about being the most knowledgeable person in the room is we need that knowledge to write more effective prompts. because I think a bunch of people right now who are in change, write a change strategy. It will make sense to somebody who doesn't know what we do by purely looking at the science. You need to take people on the journey. You need to have a comms plan. But to somebody who is that artist, somebody who is knowledgeable about all that research, I know how to ask better questions like this kind of organization with this kind of things that exist in the culture, with this kind of hierarchical structure, etc. And it brings a report that I can take to leaders and say to them, this is what I got through AI. Because I don't mind telling them that I got it through AI. But I'm saying is even AI is pointing out that one of the fundamental things you need here is a pre-change program. Because right now, you have ineffective meetings, poor communication, low levels of trust, and a hierarchical way of doing things with leaders that are perceived as being weak and afraid. Because that's one of the things I found most challenging recently is there's a phrase, 9s hire 10s, 7s hire 5s. And we're getting to a point right now where this, especially due to the financial pressures, a bunch of people are under pressure for their jobs. They don't need some smart person coming in and making them look stupid. There are also some of them, even though the companies are offering them the opportunity to get coaching and mentoring, I'm too busy for that. So somebody I spoke to recently, a gentleman named Mike Rowe, who I think I sent you an introduction because he was a former police officer, now heading up a company called 10 Cents, was a tool that he calls sense making, which is asking 16 questions of the teams, bringing that back with some insights to kind of say, this is how you are perceived. Maybe you should address that before you want to take on this big job of being the transformation lead sponsor for this program that's going to run over the next 5 years. Because doing it as you go is going to be more painful than spending 3 months, 6 months right now getting some momentum. Anyway, I say all that to say this. What have you found in the research around generative AI with regard to like prompt writing and how people are willing to accept some of these base responses?
Yeah, so I think the first thing about prompt writing is it's an iterative process. It's a learning process for yourself, certainly when you're doing it. And one of the things that we find, so with our students, one of the exercises I get them to do is we'll talk about a particular topic, whatever it is, and I actually get them to go away and get AI to produce a synopsis of the topic. And then my question to them is that correct? And you can see there's this, like they produce these great documents and all the rest of it, and they're really excited. And they go, here, look, I've produced all of this. And you just go, okay, but is it correct? And you can see the kind of, and how would you know? And it's the thing that you're talking about here is that actually, in order to interpret what it's putting out, is you need a level of expertise. Because just because it's coming up with stuff, if you don't know what it's talking about, it sounds very plausible. And this is one of the things that we've run a session about, is the language of AI is the language of certainty. You don't get it going, I may be right. There's a little thing at the bottom that says that, but it doesn't do the normal things about I've looked at these things. When you have a look at how deep AI goes into its search, so if you use, so there's a thing called, one of the GPTs for ChatGPT is a GPT Scholar. It goes into Scholar, right? So, which is an academic database for research papers. So Google Scholar, pretty well known. We ran some tests to see how deep it went. Bear in mind, if you take something like, I don't know, transformational leadership, if we have a look at, if you put into Google Scholar transformational leadership, there will be millions of hits. There are millions of papers about transformational leadership. But the question is, how deep is that going? So what we discovered was it goes no deeper than the first 3 pages, no deeper. And the way that the algorithm works isn't the most cited ones at the front either. In fact, we then sat down, there was myself and a group of other academics at Oxford, sat down to see if we could work out what the ChatGPT Scholar GPT algorithm was doing. And we came up with 9 different things that it was using in its algorithm that placed things on the first 3 pages in order to access them and decide what it was coming up with. And if you have a look at the references, it'll give you 5 references. So actually 5 papers out of 7 million.
Wow.
Like, you're talking about a 0.0 not calculated. It was on one of our seminars. I can't remember exactly what it was, but there was like 3 or 4 0.7% of all of the research it's accessing in order to give you an answer, which is like nuts. If you went and asked a leadership professor that question, they'd be able to, because they're imbued with this stuff. Mm-hmm. They're critically thinking about it. They know which papers, just because a paper's high citation, you don't know whether those citations are positive or there's a few thousand papers all knocking it to bits.
Wow.
It doesn't tell you that.
So this in turn brings me on to another topic that we've been speaking about in the Oxford Review, which is about personality change and culture change. Because this, to me, is quicksand, intellectual quicksand for me, because the further I go in, the more I'm sinking and I'm going like, oh my God, because this is the fundamental part behind transformation. So for me, my definition, transformation is this long journey, the marathon. Yeah. And along that way, we have change initiatives, which you can have as more distinct changes that are moving towards a transformation. But that transformational journey requires a leadership team similar to what happened with you in the police force that now had this shift, that train it out to other people to help slowly, using that rudder on the big oil tanker kind of thing, to slowly but surely shift it, making those minute changes along the way that are necessary, because often the commercial world can't wait for your organization to change. But what are the challenges you see for change managers and leaders within organizations in introducing even the concept of personality and culture change?
Yeah, I think so. Right. Culture change and personality change go together. You know, if you're changing the culture, we're changing, if you talk about learning and development, let's just narrow it down to just that one thing. And we say something in an organization like, and this is one of the examples we use, we want our people to be more proactive. Now, when you really think about that, what does that mean? Are we saying here that actually we want people to be different? Well, yes, we are. But are we actually saying we want them to have different personalities? We are. But we don't acknowledge that. And with the same thing with culture change. We want a different culture. We want a culture that is proactive. We want a culture that has people higher levels of engagement, which connects to this whole idea of proactivity and having a more proactive personality. And there is a concept of a proactive personality. It is an actual trait. So what organizations are often doing is they're asking for personality change. They're also, without realizing it and without knowing what it is that you need to do in order to help people to change their personality. And then there's a whole ethical question about whether that's ethical or not. Do you have the right to do it to people without them understanding that's what you're actually doing? How far can you change your personality? What are the limitations on that? There's a whole series of kind of questions that are involved in all of this. And it's the same thing with the culture. But it's labeled in this kind of, it's like a tin of stuff. And if we just open the tin and pour everything out, everything will be okay. It's a lot more complex than that. And if we understand the nuances of this a bit more, if we understand, or we can bring in the people who understand this and talk to them, not just have them come in and do a presentation. That's different. And this is one of the things that you can see with the chat GPTs. It's that iterative processes that having somebody to talk to, preferably somebody to talk to, isn't going to keep telling you you're great all the time, who actually is going to say, I need to ask you some questions first because I need to challenge you. I want to challenge your thinking in this. Now, unless you build a prompt to do that, then it's not necessarily going to do it. But if you've got an expert in there who knows what they're talking about, understands the evidence, they can go, hang on a minute, there's some things you haven't thought about here.
And this is where the reason why I'm speaking to people like Mike Rowe and 10 Cents and speaking to other people with tools is because many organizations, again, down to that fundamental understanding, they go to a comms person and say, send a survey. But there's far more in sending a survey than just writing how you write the questions. Fast brain, slow brain kind of thinking, open questions, closed questions, understanding where they're probably sitting when they're answering this question in their frame of mind. A whole range of things, which is why these scientific people have thought about that to distill it down to 16. in the case of 10 cents. But more importantly, the fact that this is the artists, this is the reason why I think that the change community needs more grounded scientific understanding, because many of the people that I meet in change are not delivery managers. I come from a background of project and program delivery, hard numbers in retail, hard numbers in food and beverage, the margins this big, right? I'm sorry, I think I'm exaggerating, right?
It is small.
And when I went into change, it was trying to understand how can we step by step address the change to then speak to the transformation, which is why the whole thing to myself and the other colleagues that I've been working with, some of them in the Oxford Review, developing the framework of incremental change management, addressing language, addressing day-to-day behaviors, addressing clear desk policy, how we run a meeting, do we have agendas, how we run our calendars, because these are little micro reflections of culture. And by addressing those and using those tools of ProSci, ADCAR, ADISAs, or whatever, we're able to show them how these tools bring out or demonstrate resistance. And recently I just put an article out saying, is the big block to resistance in your program you? To the leaders. Because many of the times, Dominic Kitchen, one of the customer psychologists I work with, he had an exercise we're doing in face-to-face meetings where he's talking to these leaders about change. And like, oh yes, and the people, blah, 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 blah. He's like, okay, it's halfway in the meeting. I need everybody to get up now and move to another chair across the room. What? But why should I can't even get you to move without question across the room. And you want to introduce a new ERP system that is going to change the very identity of the one person in the Far East who's been running the spreadsheet, keeping the company going for the past 15 years, and you're not addressing that? Come on. Resistance is human, yeah? But our key thing is, as a change manager, I can't tell people or make people change. I can simply create a condition and an environment in which they can choose to change. And I think it's getting this understanding across delivery teams, HR, comms, training, leadership, PMO. Those are the people I think we need to be focusing on first to change some of their behaviors to help make that shift in the culture. Anyway, I didn't want to end it up on that as much as this. Over the next year, this is the 10th anniversary of the Oxford Review. Are there any key special things going on, or maybe ways that people can get engaged if they're not a member and want to find out more?
Yes, sure. I'll send you the link, and if they want to. So, and you mentioned that thing about the Oxford Review not having salespeople in it. Everybody gets interviewed by me before they become a member because we're trying to keep it's a group of professionals. We're not here to sell to each other. Although people do pick up jobs from each other because we've got quite a lot of organisation, but that's fine. That's great as long as it's not solicited. Yeah, we've got a whole load of things. We've got a whole load of new sessions coming up. We've got sessions where members are going to be running sessions. We're writing a book at the moment using the members. They're going to be writing some of the chapters, so we'll be editing that. And then we've got a whole load of other special seminars and things coming up as well throughout the next, where we at now, 12 monthI'm 10 months left.
Okay. So David, thank you so much for taking out the time to chat again. I always enjoy our chats, and I'm sure there's a number of people out there that this is going to be an insight that they can turn into, inspired action. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. And yes, if anybody wants to come and play, come and play. Okay. It's great. Brilliant. Thanks, Marcellus.